The United Nations urges donors to keep and increase aid funding for Yemen. Houthi rebels' escalation deepens the humanitarian crisis and displaces thousands of people in 1 week. Governor of Shabwa announces the liberation of Bayhan city center amid collapse in the rebels' ranks. Welcome to Yemen Today TV. This is the English news with me, Roshan Fouad. The United Nations urged donors to sustain and increase their funding for the humanitarian response in Yemen. UN spokesman Stefan Dujarric said that this year the UN will work closely with all stakeholders to promote a stronger economy in Yemen, after the economic collapse was the main factor causing the increase in humanitarian needs. Dujarric indicated that 2021 humanitarian response plan had received only 58% of the funding requirements, with a shortfall of about $1.6 billion, noting that this resulted in aid agencies to scale back and close vital programs. He added that the reproductive health services, water, production, and other programs are in decline after emergency food assistance has been reduced since last December for 8 million people across the country.
We urge donors to sustain and, wherever possible, increase their funding for the humanitarian response in Yemen, which represents a lifeline to 16 million people. In 2022, we will also be working closely with all stakeholders to promote stronger economy in Yemen, as economic collapse is the main factor causing greater humanitarian needs.
The International Rescue Committee said that Yemen has dropped third on its 2022 emergency watch list for the first time in 3 years. According to the report, this is not because the humanitarian situation has improved, but because crises in other countries are worsening more quickly. The Rescue Committee indicated that in 2021 armed conflict escalated in Ma'rib and spread to new areas such as Al Bayda and Shabwa, while tensions between the government and the Southern Transitional Council are still recurrent. In a recent report, the Family Early Warning Systems Network added that between October 2021 and May 2022, the number of poor households facing Phase 3 malnutrition is expected to increase in areas directly impacted by conflict, stressing that it remains of highest concern. The U.S. network said that given improved expectations for food prices and purchasing power, poor households in government-controlled areas are expected to experience some reduction in food consumption gaps relative to recent months. The reports added that displaced families in Haita and Magbana in the West Coast are expected to face food consumption gaps. Houthi military escalation has aggravated the humanitarian crisis in the country. Thousands of people had to leave their homes and head to other safer places. Because of the daily violent confrontations, this comes at alarming signals made by the United Nations that its aid programs are facing severe funding crisis. The following report has more details.
Houthi rebels continue their military escalation that deepens suffering of Yemenis. International reports show that the military escalation and hostilities has killed, injured children, women and men, and caused displacement of about 3,000 Yemenis during the past week. It also deepened suffering of 5 million people who are one step away from famine. This military escalation coincides with relief organizations' warnings from funding shortages and calls for increased funding to continue relief operations in war-torn Yemen. The International Organization for Migration stated that about 3,000 Yemenis fled their homes during the past week as Houthi rebels continue to escalate on more than one front, while the total number of displaced people increased during the past year to more than 150,000 individuals. Between December 26, 2021 and January 1, 2022, 466 families were displaced at least once. The UN agency said that conflict was the main cause of displacement, accounting for 94%, followed by economic causes at 6%. From January 1, 2021 and January 1, 2022, 26,227 families, or some 157,362 individuals were displaced at least once in the first update of the current year. The UN Migration indicated that overcrowded sites for displaced people are still receiving newly displaced families. The UN Migration indicated that 4 to 5 families often share 2 tents, while others have moved to farms and open spaces where humanitarian services are intermittent or non-existent. The organization said that the urgent funding requirements amount to $10 million, noting that the largest needs in displacement sites are shelter, non-food items, education services and water, sanitation and hygiene services. Meanwhile, the United Nations Children's Fund confirmed that 10,000 children have been killed in Yemen since March 2015, with the equivalent of 4 children per day, although the numbers could be higher. According to UNICEF, the largest monthly number of civilian casualties was calculated during the third quarter in September 2021, when 233 civilian casualties were reported, including 67 deaths. UNICEF received a total of $285.3 million, leaving a funding gap of 44% of the total amount required to continue life-saving work in Yemen. Civilians in Yemen are still bearing the burden of Houthis' war, as they continue rejecting all peace proposals.
Turning to Shabwa, the governor announced the liberation of Al Olia city in the center of Bayhan district, with Houthi fighters fleeing the area after receiving enormous losses. According to military sources, the forces of the giants entered center of Bayhan, stationed in the security department of the district, and carried out a campaign to clear the city and pursue the militia fighters, who fled towards El Kunza mountain west of Bayhan and on the borders of Al Bayda. For his part, the governor Awad El Awlaki praised the sacrifices of the giant forces, government forces' resistance, and coalition over the military victories achieved. Still in Shabwa, 4 people were killed by Houthi attack on Usaylan district. According to Sabah agency, 4 civilians were killed and others injured as a result of Houthi attack that targeted a fuel station. Earlier, Houthi rebels have targeted the house of Colonel Nasser El-Kahayh. With a ballistic missile, 14 civilians were killed and 9 were wounded, including children and women. To Ma'rib, the government forces, backed by tribesmen and the popular resistance, advanced on several fronts in the city and stormed positions of the coup militia in the southern front of the province. Sources confirmed that the forces continue to advance on the fronts, noting that the militia has incurred heavy losses and dozens of its militants fled the battlefields. The coalition announced launching 28 operations against the Houthi militia in Ma'rib and 35 operations in Shabwa within 24 hours. It reported operations in Ma'rib destroyed 19 vehicles and killed 150, while in Shabwa 240 were killed and 25 vehicles have been destroyed. The recent military activities in Shabwa reveal the geopolitical importance of the city. Houthis are moving their troops to win the rich oil city as they can fund their war against Yemenis. Yet the rebels are being confronted with a solid resistance from the government forces, whose fighters are inflicting Houthis with considerable losses in different fronts. More details about this is in the following report.
Shabwa is a strategic governorate in the Yemeni conflict. The strategic importance of this governorate lies firstly in its location in the central south of Yemen, bordering the flashpoint of Ma'rib, where the Houthi rebels are keen to seize. The governorate is known for its oil and gas resources, along with its strategic location as a port city on the Arabian Sea, through which international trade and other resources are channeled. The joint forces, including the giant brigades, have relocated their deployment in Shabwa recently. The move looks at the importance of this area to defend the Houthi persistence in penetrating the neighboring Ma'rib. Through cutting the lines of support to Houthi rebels in Shabwa, the joint forces will suffocate the rebels in the southern fronts of Ma'rib. This kind of circling will firstly hinder the rebels' attempts to take Ma'rib and will henceforth push the Houthis back into the capital Sana'a. This forced retreat to the capital may foretell a turning point in the 7-year conflict, or may put an end to the war. Solidifying Ma'rib is the best victory the joint forces may score in the current Southern Storm operation to liberate Shabwa. Ma'rib is the government hot point, which lies in the center of conflict and had the largest displacement population in Yemen. The rebels look to penetrate Ma'rib to control the main routes of contact in Yemen, as well as securing the oil-rich resources in the governorate. The thing that the government forces, the joint forces, and the coalition are trying not to lose. The joint forces now have controlled the Arak International Airport in Shabwa capital. They advanced and controlled Usayla northwest of the governorate to the southern fronts of Marib. The forces are heading to Bayhan to secure Usaylan in the direction of Ain district to liberate the whole of Shabwa in order to circle the Houthis in the south of Marib.
Coming up, Houthi rebels launch parallel soft war against Yemenis.
اضطرينا أن نغادر من ذي وزحنا.
الله يستبدلكم يا محويتني لا الله يستبدل.
Welcome back. The Yemeni Journalist Syndicate announced that it had monitored 104 cases of violations against media outlets, journalist photographers from January 1 to December 31, 2021. This came in its annual report on media freedoms in Yemen for 2021, which indicated that violations were distributed among detention, prevention, confiscation, threats, incitement, trial, assaults, depriving right to medical treatment, torture, and murder. The report indicated that Houthi rebels committed 46 cases of violations, representing 44% of the total violations. It also said that murder accounted 3.8% of total violations, with 4 cases reported. Although Houthi coup caused the worst humanitarian crisis in Yemen, yet the rebels have launched another parallel war against Yemenis. It's the media war that carries a lot of misinformation, hate speech, and extremism to manipulate the masses with their fallacious propaganda. A complete control on media platforms was meant to make people adhere to their agenda. The following report has more details.
Yemen's horrifying civil war is paralleled by a second conflict in the information space, in digital and traditional media, and over control of the internet itself. Amid the world's worst humanitarian crisis, one that has claimed as many as 400,000 lives and forced another 4 million to flee, is an epidemic of online misinformation, disinformation, hate speech, and extremism that is undermining what little trust remains after 7 years of conflict. Early in the conflict, the Houthi rebels gained control of the domain, which Yemeni websites can use instead of .com. They also took control of the local internet service provider, YemenNet, in order to filter content and manage national websites. Over time, they restricted internet usage, censored sites, and disrupted social media, including access to popular platforms such as Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. Described by locals as a soft war, pro-Houthi platforms are projecting documentaries, media stories, satirical cartoons, and online posts to win over the public. In order to short-circuit foreign attempts to derail their propaganda efforts, Houthis cut undersea cables with Iranian support and even started mining cryptocurrency to finance their operations. Competition over control of the telecommunication and information sector is poisoning the country's conventional and social media landscape. Yemeni news networks are deeply polarized, and most citizens outside Houthi-controlled areas are losing faith in the objectivity and truthfulness of domestic media outlets. Persistent contact with fake news is disruptive, even in stable contexts. In war zones, however, it can be lethal. Access to reliable information is essential to avoid violent confrontation, access relief aid, and eventually build peace and reconciliation.
In a new sectorial move, Houthi militia has restricted enrollment in the Faculty of Medicine to their family members and affiliates, while abandoning other citizens from having that right. The following report has more details.
Equal citizenship and opportunities between different groups and segments of society are values enshrined in the Republican system in all government and educational facilities. The A student in high school had his share of entering the scientific faculties of Sana'a University, such as the College of Medicine and others. But admission since the Houthi militia invaded the capital Sana'a has become limited to people belonging to its dynasty or those who owe allegiance to them, without regard to the eligibility of their rates and their entitlement to the seats they were granted at the expense of the superiors from the Republic. Sana'a University, which for half a century has been on top of the list for outstanding students from different governorates, is now the preserve of dynastic families, as activists on social media circulated a list containing the names of those admitted to the Faculty of Medicine at Sana'a University for the academic year 2021-2022. Class differences and discrimination based on racial considerations were documented, as most of the names belonged to the sons of prominent Houthi leaders or families loyal to the militia, in return for depriving the outstanding students from enrolling in the College of Medicine, which has become a private college run by Houthi leaders, along with the rest of the facilities of Sana'a University. And the outstanding students should pay an amount of $2,000 annually for admission. Many of the daily lived events reflect the racism of the militia, like what happened with the student Salah Abu Lahoum, the first in his class at the Faculty of Law, whose name was dropped from the list of those admitted to the higher institute of the judiciary and replaced with others belonging to the Houthi dynasty to deprive him from his dream and certificates. This is what the Houthi militia wants to deliver the Yemeni people to. So after they kill their dreams and make them lose hope, it's easy to lure them to the battlefronts so that they will be honored by the death squad in funeral processions, while the sons of the racist dynasty enjoy the distinguished seats in Yemeni universities, foreign scholarships, and even leadership positions in all state facilities, as this was the same case during the era of the fading imamate.
Teachers in liberated areas in Hodeidah have met with the governor to voice their demands. They have been without salary increase for more than 6 years. The following report looks at the outcomes of the meeting.
Demands and discussions put forward by the teachers at the dialogue table in front of the governor of Hodeidah, Dr. Al-Hassan Tahir, who came to the city of Hais to listen to the teachers' problems and aspirations and to listen to their demands that were contained in the statement of the previous vigil that was organized during the past 2 days.
We demand for our yearly bonuses to be paid from 2014 till 2021. We also demand payment of living allowances and the increase of our salaries from 30 to 70%, which was endorsed by the government before.
Solutions and points were proposed by the teachers, and the governor expressed his willingness to stand with teachers, which includes them in the statement of deferred allowances payment at the Ministry of Finance this year, in which the ministry refuses to include them on the pretext that they are from a completely liberated governorate, while educators in liberated areas considered them to be slight justifications.
We call on authorities to include Hais and Al-Khoucha to the payments the government put before. We hope the authorities hear our voices and to include us to the payments that has all governorates and to have the right to take our portions.
Teachers still lack the most basics of their rights guaranteed to them by law, and they have suffered calamities and the bitterness and cruelty of life as a result of the war, in light of their failure to obtain their rights and the government's failure to pay them, while teachers whose jobs were dropped in the year 2011 also suffer from the interruption of their meager salary. The governor of Hodeidah, Dr. Hassan Al-Tahir, held an extensive meeting with teachers who are living in difficult conditions due to the low salary and the government's failure to pay the allowances suspended for 7 years after the educators organized a lack of protest during the past 2 days.
لم يصرفوا لنا أي رواتب من قبل.
We haven't been paid since 2016, and until now we didn't get paid at all. And also the salary they gave us recently is too little, as we cannot afford anything with it.
During the past years of war in Yemen, teachers were deprived of their salaries, although some of them recently received them in the liberated areas. But they still need the attention and care, as they are responsible for the upbringing of our families and future builders.
To economy, the Yemen Riyal lost again against US dollar, recording 1,143 Riyals for a single dollar. To that end, Ministry of Finance directed the closure of current accounts in commercial banks and money exchangers related to units of the administrative apparatus to unify the state's financial channels. The circular stressed the closure of current accounts in commercial banks and money exchangers for government departments, institutions, independent and attached units. Still in Aden, hundreds of people took to the streets in protest over the collapse of the national currency. Protesters closed a number of money exchange shops, demanding the control of currency manipulators. They called on the government to take real solutions to the deterioration of the Riyal. The Yemeni Petroleum Company announced a breakthrough in the fuel crisis in government-controlled cities. The company confirmed availability of stock by pumping sufficient quantities of oil and diesel to all public and private stations, at the government price set at 660 Riyals per litre. Aden and a number of governorates witnessed fuel crisis while cars queued in front of open gas stations. To health, the National Committee Against Coronavirus recorded 7 cases of the pandemic. Committee officials said there were no recovered cases and no deaths. With the current updates, the total confirmed cases are 10,159, including 1,986 deaths and 7,043 cases of recovery. This comes at a time when warnings continue from the outbreak of the 4th wave of the pandemic in war-torn Yemen. Here is a reminder of the main headlines. The United Nations urged donors to keep and increase the aid funding for Yemen. Houthi rebels' escalation deepens the humanitarian crisis and displaces thousands of people in 1 week. Governor of Shabwa announces the liberation of Bayhan city center amid collapses in the rebels' ranks. This is the end of the news. For more, follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube at Yemen Today English. This was Roshan Fouad. Thank you for watching.